9:34 here, Big 550 KTRS. I had the chance to go see Bellefontaine Cemetery a couple of weeks ago, and I went on a walking tour. And I've always heard about Bellefontaine Cemetery, but it's kind of one of those things that you hear about and you know about, and you sort of talk, people say, and you're like, oh yeah, sure. But once I went and did a walking tour, holy mackerel, what a beautiful place. And I wanted to get them on to talk about it. So Nancy Ilvasacker, president of Bellefontaine Cemetery, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Thank you so much.
You need to talk right into that microphone. There we go. So Bellefontaine Cemetery, you've been president there how long?
6 years.
It's sort of, I want to say it's a hidden gem, but it's a hidden gem in plain sight.
It is a hidden gem. It's been a quiet place for about 75 years, but we've been around for 165 years, and we're trying to make people familiar with just how amazing this place is.
So let's start. So how did Bellefontaine Cemetery start?
It started, very interesting, it started in the 1850s because there were a lot of problems with cholera in St. Louis, and the cemeteries were all full and overcrowded, so people literally couldn't find places to get buried. So the city leaders who were busy building, levees and lots of infrastructure said, well, part of that infrastructure is a really good cemetery that will never be plowed under, it will never be moved, it'll be nonprofit and open to everyone. And here we are 165 years later.
Is it true, Nancy, that Bellefontaine Cemetery is less than half full?
It is less than half full. We still have over 100 acres available. In fact, that's more land than the Botanical Garden has. We're 314 acres, 4 times bigger than Mobot.
Yeah. It's a cemetery. It's a working cemetery, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's also a history museum in and of itself.
Yes, and your viewers have probably seen some of our new outdoor board campaigns saying, see the other botanical gardens, see the other history museum. And it's because we truly embody the traits of all those other cultural institutions. We really carry the history of the city, the landscape of the city. We're a qualified arboretum with thousands of trees and gardens. So you can come to Bellefontaine and really do some of the same things that you would do at every other cultural in St. Louis.
For years, I always thought Bellefontaine Cemetery was for the hoity-toity. It was for the William Clarks. It was for the Bushes, and it's open to everybody.
It's open to everyone, and of course, part of what makes it so fun is that there are all those notables buried there, and the history of St. Louis and the industries, and the founders of those industries is all there. But it's full of everyday citizens, everyday heroes, policemen, firefighters, you name it, from all walks of life, the people who built St. Louis.
Yeah. Talk about the walking tours.
Sure.
Because people hear about it, people just have no idea how great those things really are.
Well, we have both coach tours and we have walking tours, and it depends on how much time you have, but we've got 25 master guides who take people on those tours, and they have different specialties. You can do an arboretum tour, you can do a women's history tour, fur traders, beer barons. They're tailored to different public interests, and then of course you get the expertise of the guides who are range from history professors to master arborists and gardeners.
How often do these tours happen?
It depends on the season. In most of the year, we have one bus tour a month, and then we have walking tours as well, and that depends on interest and who asks. But you can call the cemetery, or you can go on our website and sign up.
If you just wanted to go and called them and said, hey, when's the next tour, you'll get a couple people together and you'll go on a tour.
You can do that. You can put your own tour together, sign up for a guide, and the cemetery can help arrange all that, or you can go by yourself. There are white lines painted on the lanes so that you don't get lost. You can always get out, and we have lots of free maps.
How much does the tour cost?
The tour is free.
No, seriously, how much is it?
Seriously, it is free.
Tell me about
seriously free.
The guides are really interesting too. Tell me about them.
They're a fabulous group of people who love history, who love landscapes, and so they call us and say, can we volunteer? Can we come in and help promote the cemetery? And they do. And they all operate under the Friends organization, which is a separate nonprofit we formed to help support the cemetery. So we raise money, we put on events, and we've always had huge support from the public.
How long does it take to become a guide? Because I just can't call up and say, I want to be a guide. There's got to be some type of test or education or some level of learning, because there's just so much to learn out there.
There's a lot to learn. Generally, people who call us already know a lot, and they offer their specialties. And if they don't have a particular specialty, typically they'll work with another guide until they're comfortable and ready to take people out.
Right. Yeah.
We'll do some training where they match up with someone else.
Sure. I was amazed by it. Not only is it a history of St. Louis Bellefontaine Cemetery, but it's also kind of a history of the 20th century, of the 19th and 20th century, because St. Louis touched so many different things. You know, the first kindergarten, the first this, the first that, the first, this is Eads Bridge, and that was that. I mean, it's like a walking guide to how we came to be who we are today.
Oh, exactly. You can really learn the history of the city by going to Bellefontaine, and you learn it in a very hands-on way because you're standing at the grave of many, many great people who helped the city become what it is today, and that gives you a very different feeling than reading about it in a textbook or seeing it on the wall of a museum.
Yeah. You also find that people leave things on the famous grave sites, right?
They do, and it depends. For example, the author William Burroughs had a favorite vegetable or fruit, depending on how you define it, which was tomatoes. And so we'll find baskets of tomatoes on the anniversary of his birth or death. Other people put pennies on graves. Often we find pennies on William Clark's grave. Not sure why, but it's just a little memento that people leave.
Tell me about all the beer barons there.
There are over 55 beer barons, and you can really trace the history of beer in St. Louis. So we have a big beer barons event every year with bluegrass music and beer samplings, brats, and then fabulous tours to visit the graves of the great brewers.
You would think that visiting a cemetery might be a little strange for some people. And I never thought, I don't know, I just never thought about it. But once I went, not only was it interesting, but it was kind of peaceful and it was kind of serene, and it was, it was really I had a fun afternoon there.
It's very peaceful. We like to say that we don't have any ghosts. And think of it this way. If you love your family, they've passed on, your great-grandmother, your grandmother, there's nothing spooky about that. You're coming to visit the people that you love and the people that other people love. And we try to allow people to do that in a really beautiful setting. And one of the things we're doing right now that you'll probably find interesting is we're trying to take some of that land we have and really create almost a botanical garden. So people are looking for something different. They don't want to just have a little chunk of granite, but they'd like to recognize that they can be in a special place. So we have a new development that's just opening that's all about the flowers, the gardens, and then you can be buried there and find it a very special place to visit with your family.
Let's talk about the green movement when it comes to cemeteries. This is the first time I've heard anything about this. Explain that to me.
Sure. Well, it started for us because we are a huge landscape in the city, and it's really important to protect those open landscapes and treat them sustainably. So we looked at what we could do to make a difference environmentally, and we don't use pesticides and chemicals on our property. And then we started devoting some land to a green burial area, but you can do a green burial in a regular cemetery burial lot. All it means is you don't get embalmed, you don't have a great big heavy casket that doesn't dissolve. It's about going back to what our ancestors did, dust to dust, and being buried in a simple pine coffin, a shroud. And it's much better for the planet, and it's much better for the pocketbook. It's much, much less expensive to do a green burial than it is to do a traditional burial with a fancy coffin.
And you're seeing people come in and ask for this?
We are. Yes, we get so many calls about green burials in many different ways. And as we like to say, there are many shades of green. There's no one thing. There are many, many versions.
So you might want to be in a pine box but have a headstone, or not want a headstone, or 6 and 1/2 a dozen.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cremation in and of itself, you have you showed me when I was out there. Talk about that for a moment.
So if people want to be cremated, which about 40% of people do today, you can put those remains in the ground, but you can also put them in a building. We have a really beautiful historic chapel, and there's an annex in the back that has little niches that you put the urns with cremated remains. And then we have a really, really lovely one outdoors that has fountains in it and a stream running through it with little granite niches where the remains are placed, and then engraving is put on the
And
niches.
You can rent out the chapel for weddings. And you do that.
You can rent out the chapel for weddings, for small parties, for lectures. It's one of the most beautiful places in the city. It's on the bluffs overlooking the river.
Right.
Truly, truly lovely.
And people rent it out for weddings and
they do.
all sorts of things.
Very inexpensive, and most nonprofits who want to use the space, we just offer it up to them.
So as president of Bellefontaine Cemetery, what's the one story you learned since you were there that you said, wow, I had no idea?
That a cemetery could be such an unbelievable place, and that a cemetery like that existed in St. Louis. We're considered one of the top 10 cemeteries in the country, and really were one of the original parks. There were no parks in St. Louis, remember, in the 1850s. So we served that function of a park and a landscape of gardens.
So the other cities don't have cemeteries like this.
Well, many of the old historic cities of the Northeast do. So there's a network of a couple of dozen of these around the country, but the really, really large ones. There are many smaller rural cemeteries, but the ones that are 300 acres and above, there's a couple dozen.
Before we let you go, I mentioned, or I found out, as a big supporter of Nurses for Newborns, you guys have something, you work with little infants and babies, part of the volunteer system. Talk about that for a moment.
We do a lot of community work, both in the neighborhood around us, but also in our gates. And there are many families that can't afford, for various reasons, to provide a burial, a grave, and a service for a young infant or baby. So we have a beautiful little babies garden. We call it the Garden of Angels. We've raised money. The public has donated money for the garden, for the angel statue in the garden, for the benches, the markers. So it's all free to any family that needs that service.
That's pretty extraordinary. All right. And Bellefontaine Cemetery has been around since what, 1859?
1849.
1849. So before the Civil War.
Yep.
And it's less than half full.
It's less than half full. It's beautiful. And it's still affordable and open.
And open to everybody.
And open to everybody.
And open to everybody. It's really interesting. All right. Nancy Ilvasacker. How's that?
Indeed.
I'm 2 for 2. Bellefontaine Cemetery. Where is it? How do you get there?
The easiest thing to do is take 70, and you get off at the West Florissant exit, and you come up the exit, and it's right there. It's in the city limits. It's at the junction of Kings Highway and West Florissant Avenue.
And the website?
www.bellefontainecemetery.org.
Plus, there are books. You got books and all that type of stuff for people who want more information, more history.
We have lots and lots of booklets that you can buy for just a few dollars about notable women, Civil War figures, and then a larger book that was written by one of our trustees, Carol Shepley, that provides vignettes of people buried in the cemetery. And it's a great read. You can read for 5 minutes, put it on your bedside table, and the next night read about somebody else.
It's really one of those things that if you got friends coming into town and you're looking for something to do, you take them to go see the Arch. But I'm telling you, you would love a walking tour of Bellefontaine Cemetery. It really was an enjoyable afternoon.
Oh, we're so glad you liked it. And
it was really fun. It was. I mean, I'm a history geek, so when you have somebody, a docent or a guide, telling you great stories in a great storyteller way, that fills you up, because you're like, I had no idea. Who knew?
And to combine it with tours like the Beer Barons event, or our Sip, Souls, and Strolls, where you can have a late afternoon glass of wine at our chapel and then a walking tour from the chapel. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Nancy Ilvasacker, president of Bellefontaine Cemetery. Thanks for checking in.
Thanks so much for having me.
You got it. 947 here, Big 550 KTRS. Let me tell you about Manila.